That's why we deal with more challenges as entrepreneurs. We deal with a lot more challenge because there is no roadmap. I can't look at somebody, even another entrepreneur, and say, I'm going to follow the exact steps this guy did to get here in life. It will never work.
All right. So in this session, I really want to focus on how to make us better, how to become better accountable to the things that we lay out for ourselves. And in today's conversation, one of my friends, Chris Waldron, is an executive accountability coach. And he's the kind of person that works with a lot of executives and entrepreneurs to help them better understand who they are, who they want to become, and ultimately how to bridge the gap by being accountable to the things that they want. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, let him introduce himself, and then we're going to dive right in. Chris, take it away.
Thank you. I appreciate that intro. My name is Chris Waldron. I'm an executive accountability coach. I specialize primarily with entrepreneurs and also C-suites, primarily CEOs. And I specialize specifically because it allows me to narrow in a specific type of person. And that's what makes me hyper effective. I am currently an entrepreneur myself. So I am the youngest of three. I started my first company when I was 20. My older brother and sister went to college. I didn't have the same opportunity. So I started a business when I was 20 and I then sold it at 24. And have since gone on to build multiple other companies. I've sold 4 of them. And now I still own one products company that's been on major nationally syndicated TV shows. And I also coach, and we'll get into how that became here in a second. That's an interesting story itself. But I can say that this is the funnest and most engaging work that I've ever done. And I don't believe that doing this work feels like a job. I absolutely love everybody that I work with, the results that we get. And I couldn't be more excited to wake up every day and come into this office and do this type of work.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, I will say that, well, first of all, I didn't know as much about the background that you had outlined, so I appreciate you sharing that. But what's fascinating is I assume that a lot of where you were shaped who you became and how you became to do what you do. Is that not fair?
That's absolutely correct. So, and I love that you brought that up. When people talk about the world as they see it, at the end of the day, our world is built as a product of the way that we grew up and our parents and our schooling and our jobs maybe that we had before we became entrepreneurs. You do what you do because of the building blocks that were built when you were younger, primarily, 0 to 18, right? So a lot of people come in with challenges of, I see these things this way, or I feel this guilt or whatever. It's always starting with very simple questions about, let's talk about where you came from. Mm-hmm. We're not going to go back and rewrite history. We can't do that. The past doesn't equal the future unless you live there. However, we can seek understanding so we can narrow in on the right things to look at and change to really get different results. So I am absolutely a product of my upbringing and all the experiences I've had since then, most notably when I went through my entrepreneurship career.
Okay.
Because there's, as anybody listening knows, it's an entrepreneur. It's quite the roller coaster, yes. Right? It is not very set and forget. And, that's why we deal with more challenges as entrepreneurs. We deal with a lot more challenge because there is no roadmap. I can't look at somebody, even another entrepreneur, and say, I'm going to follow the exact steps this guy did to get here in life. It will never work. There's too many variables that change consistently: time, industry, opportunity, that can't be replicated. So we're all walking into a foggy unknown every day, and thus we deal with a lot more stresses, a lot more uncertainties, which naturally challenge us more because the people around us also don't deal with that.
Yeah.
And it's very isolating.
And so your background in creating the companies and selling the companies and doing those things obviously puts you in a perfect position to be able to advise and coach people on the problems that they're going through, because obviously you've walked that path, as you just said. And since there really is no path, if there was a path, you've been down that road before, so you know how to identify those challenges and those issues, right?
Absolutely. I've been down that path several times. And what I found when I got into professional coaching was now that's so much more expansive, because not only do I have the experience of my story, but that, because I'm so closely intertwined with the people that I work with one-on-one, all of their stories and their progress and their pathways as well, right? When I do one-on-one coaching, we're not just talking about here's our metrics for business. We're talking about where does the personal life and the business life marry up, and how do we make those work better together? Because at the end of the day, we can't just attack the problem in a vacuum. We can't just attack the business or the productivity issues in a vacuum where we're like, well, if we just do more,
Right.
it just doesn't make sense. It negates the rest of life, and how that really, ask anybody that's been through a divorce how much their company grew. If they're a sole owner, they don't have systems and processes in place.
Yeah.
Ask them about their progress during that time. I mean, you can't negate that kind of thing. And that's a very easy example. I think a lot of people, the mean average of people, are dealing with issues that they just don't fully understand, that have been a part of their life forever. Therefore, they don't see it as an issue. It's just who they are. And that actually creates some challenges for them. And that's interesting to not only discover with that individual, but then really work over time consistently to recondition things and get different results, where it's something before may have said something to the tune of, this is just how things are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, you know what? Doesn't mean that's how they have to be in the future. And I think, wow.
Yeah.
That's personal power. I mean, it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I 100% agree with that. So for the listener out there, to be fully transparent, Chris and I have worked together with a couple of clients, and I bring that up because I want people to better understand, Chris, what is the difference between like a therapist or a consultant or a coach, and then really, where does the executive accountability coach fit into that? Because once we better understand that, then I want to better dive into accountability itself to kind of lay the groundwork for some other topics that we're going to cover later today.
Sure. So to repeat the question, what's the difference between coaching, therapy, and consulting? So we'll remove one of those immediately, consulting. I think consulting is a very results-based, very timeline-based project where, obviously we don't know what we're always walking into, but I think that's a bit of a separate thing. I think a really good piece of that is, what's the difference between therapy and coaching? The simplest answer I could say would be that therapy goes backwards, coaching goes forwards.
Interesting.
And what I mean by that is, when you're in therapy is very emotional based, which obviously is needed. And just a side caveat here, for all the men out there that listen to the throes of content on YouTube that say, oh, we've got to be men, we don't have emotions. And, at the end of the day, I just don't agree with that. I think everybody has emotions. And when you say things like that, you're just placing responsibility outside of your control. The better way to handle that is to understand your emotions. Whether you display them to everybody in the world is your prerogative. But at the end of the day, you do have emotions, and they are very important to all the processes you do, the things you do day to day. So looking at the contrast between therapy and coaching, therapy, and remember, there's multiple factions of therapy. There's counseling, there's talk therapy, there's psychotherapy, there's, CBT, DBT. There's all these intense types of therapies as well, trauma coaching, things like that. I think those very much are in place, as they should be, to understand your past and have an open environment where you're talking to somebody that you trust, to really bring up things that you feel vulnerable on. And that's a fantastic place for anybody to really seek understanding of themselves, why they do what they do, the things they're challenged with. When you flip over to coaching, where therapy looks backwards and you seek understanding and maybe reassess the meaning of things that have happened in your past, right? Because everything that's happened in our past, we can't change. However, we place the meaning on that. So those pasts can either empower us or they can hold us down. And everybody has the availability, whether or not they utilize it, to reshape the meaning of their past. They can't change it, but they can change what it means to them moving forward. That's an incredibly powerful step. When you get into the coaching, now you're flipping over to, maybe I understand, maybe I don't, but I know that I can get different results moving forward. How do I do that? How do I be consistent over time, focusing on making these changes to get the results that I want, and have potentially someone there, a coach, who, like in sports, is watching from the outside, helping, seeing things from a different perspective, and really being your right-hand person for your individual life, where you can't get that in your employee structure, right? You don't want to be going to your COO and being like, listen, man, I had a rough childhood, right? I need you to talk to me about that. That I don't think that's going to work in any corporate environment. I think that's going to
And it sounds like it's almost like a good marriage of the two, right? Someone helps you identify the things in the past that are shaping who you are today, and then the coach is helping you take that new person you are today and carry them to the next person that you want to become in the future, which is fascinating to think about, because I think everybody then needs a dual approach to thinking about where they want to go. But in order to do that, they got to figure out where they were, who they became, or how they became who they became today. Now, I'm curious, as you're going through this idea of what coaching is, there are lots of different types of coaches out there, right? We've got life coaches, we've got business coaches, we've got executive coaches or executive accountability coaches. When someone's trying to better understand the landscape of coaching, how did you become an executive accountability coach as opposed to an alternate coach?
So that's an interesting question, and I say interesting because the term life coach. Ask anybody to define life coach, I think they come up with a very different answer. And that's a challenge in the industry, because everything could be categorized against it, because everything you're doing is within life, and also nothing could be categorized within that term. So that's a very ambiguous term at the end of the day. What I do is very results oriented. In the fact that, again, I only work with entrepreneurs and C-suites, so decision makers, people that have incentives to push the bar, because in this world, right, we are trying to get results that are well above our need threshold. We don't need all of this extra. We don't need to press. We don't need to do those things according to society. We want to do them, and that involves a different level of not only psychological understanding, but just really structure and things in place that you can press the bar and get different results, right? We're as entrepreneurs, we're trying to be anomalies. We are actively out there trying to get results way above the normal threshold. And that brings its own set of challenges. So accountability coaching, executive coaching in general, is very focused at that level with people or individuals that are at a level in business where they can make changes structurally, where they can be the decision makers to really fundamentally change an entire system on top of the individual. And that makes the biggest difference in results. If you're talking about a solo entrepreneur who doesn't have an organization, it's very focused on that individual and the results they can achieve. If you're talking about a CEO or COO or an entrepreneur owner, maybe a board member, whatever position you hold up there that has an organization, just that individual's changes might not change the entire organization. So those two work in concert together, right? We've got to work on the individual. We've got to work with how that interacts across the organization. So accountability in an organization is a key component if you have a team. If you're the most accountable person in the world, but obviously you're a cog in the wheel, I'll say, to use a cliche. If all those other cogs are bent and broken, doesn't matter how sharp your teeth are. It's just not going to work.
Right.
So there are two very different levels. Contrasting that to life, again, it's hard to contrast to a life coach because it would depend specifically which one,
Right.
I assume. So, I can only speak on what I do specifically. It's a very results-oriented thing that we want to maximize an individual. And if they have an organization, we want to make sure that that is actually worthwhile within the organization. And if we have to traverse into that organization, make changes to the culture there, we do that too.
So let's give an example then, right? So Any book you read talks about setting a vision as an entrepreneur, right? And one of the books that I've read over the years, keep reading actually, talks about establishing a big, hairy, audacious goal, right? This big thing in the future that we want to pursue. And every entrepreneur that I've ever worked with or talked with, whether it be on the personal planning side or on our consultancy, we all have the vision of what we want to do. Not always great at executing to the vision, but if we're lucky enough to figure out a path to execute to the vision, it's trying to stay accountable to ourselves and to the people around us to make sure that we can do our best in trying to achieve that vision. The problem becomes, again, how do we maintain that focus? How do we stay accountable to ourselves? And so let's use this as an example of when you're working with clients, how do you help them stay accountable? Because, as something we've talked about off air, no one can make you accountable to yourself.
Correct.
So how does someone stay accountable? Like where are you coming in to kick them in the ass and say, yes, this is the X, this is the path, this is the whatever. How do you make sure they stay on path, or help us better understand where your role fits into this person who set this big ass goal and kind of has a vision for it, but needs help along the path?
Sure. So that's an excellent question. So that's really a two-part question when we look at it. It's on the individual level and an organizational level. But I want to point out a clarity first. I am kicking no one's ass.
Okay.
Not that I can't physically, but it wouldn't do anything for any one individual, right? At the end of the day, if you're motivated by someone screaming in your face, great, for about 5 minutes. But when that element isn't present, what happens? Right? It's kind of like integrity. It's not about what you do when people are looking. It's about what you do when people aren't looking.
Interesting.
So when any individual comes to me or any organization comes to me and they say, oh, I need you to hold such and such accountable or me accountable. And I'm like, this is an instant red flag, because what you're saying in that moment is I want to place these outcomes outside of my personal control. And that's where everybody gets in trouble in terms of productivity, right? We can only deal with things that are inside of our control at the end of the day. And this is true, and we'll talk about in a little bit about goal setting and why that's so important there too. So if you are saying, I want you to hold me accountable, you're saying, I don't really want to do this, but please say something at some point, kick my ass proverbially, to get me over this line. Fantastic. Maybe I would do that. But what happens when I'm not there? That's not very sustainable, right? And success is all about consistency over time. So if that's only when I'm around and standing in front of you, yelling at you or, kicking your teeth in, which I don't think would actually help you get things done either. Right. Right. A quick trip to the ER and a couple grand, I guess. It's very much about, let's look at it this way. The technical definition of accountability is the willingness to accept responsibility for one's own tasks. And my version of that is taking responsibility for your own outcomes, right? That's accountability. There's a lot of pieces to that, most notably clarity as well. So you talk about getting this BHAG, this big, hairy, audacious goal, right? We've set out this vision for our company of where we want to go, or maybe an individual, where I want to go. The very first thing that I always look at is this actually possible? Somewhere along the lines, post 2005, when YouTube became a thing, people started generating this content about the idea that's like, and I see it all the time on my initial intakes. I used to see it, is, I'm starting out, right? Maybe I have a company that's under $1 million a year, maybe way under that. And in the next 5 years, I want to be a billionaire. And I want
that too.
Yeah. Isn't that, yeah. There's very rare lottery chances that even get that high, right? My immediate response to that is always, tell me who you're trying to impress.
Right.
Who is it that you missed that from? That's a completely different problem, right? Why do you need a billion? You have no idea the responsibility, the sacrifice, the opportunities that would need to happen for that to happen. Also, are you saying with $500 million, you're not it?
Yeah.
Very, very, very odd statement. At the end of the day, most people don't really need that much money. We're talking about results above our personal levels of need.
Yeah.
And most people, while it sounds cool because I've been flashed that in my face, it's just not a reality. So is it possible, right? Going from zero to a billionaire, throw me all the references you want in the world, but the chances and probabilities of that happening are relatively low.
Exactly.
So we refocus. If that's the case, we refocus on like, where do we actually want to move? Keep in mind that when you're developing these things, you're trying to get a general direction of where you want to go. I do not know what I'm going to know in a year, 2 years, 3 years about this work, this industry, my culture, myself. So I can't always see outcomes that far ahead because I'm going to know, and situations are going to happen during that time that are going to fundamentally change what's possible. So all we're trying to do when we set out a big, hairy, audacious goal in the future is really set out an idealization of, if everything went right, here's where I would be at if I was really maximizing myself because in my organization. And that's really important because we don't want to make it so large that it seems insurmountable, right? That you can't connect your big 5-year, 10-year goal with like anything you're doing today. It would be pointless. We also don't want it so small that tomorrow it's done.
That's true.
And you have to go back and redo it all.
Yeah.
Right? It's pointless. It's like we're not dragging ourselves forward. And remember, because we're not employed here, we don't have things just coming into a single file. We have to create that. So we need to just see enough road ahead of us to motivate us to move forward and break through barriers and really get things done. But we don't need to throw that so far forward, again, to impress somebody or, to get to some figure that somehow we have some emotional attachment to that when we actually are asked questions about, that all falls apart.
No, I completely agree with that. It's this balancing act that we tell entrepreneurs that your vision, your goal has to be big enough to incorporate everyone else's vision. Because if someone's going to work with you or for you as an employee or as an executive, their vision of their department or what they want to accomplish has to be big as well, because then they have to be able to roll it out to their employees. So you're 100% correct. Being a billionaire is great. Running $1 billion company is great. But at the end of the day, you have to evolve that vision. And that may be, the pie in the sky thing that you're like, hey, someday in the future, it may happen. But for the time being, I'm focusing on the next 5 years. And in that next 5 years, the vision is just so big so that I can ideally achieve it. And I want to make sure everyone in my arsenal of employees obviously has a vision that fits with inside mine. And if their visions are bigger than mine, then I need to expand it. And that's a great way of being able to push my vision out further to make sure that I'm continuing to grow as a person. But as I say these things, and I think about even my own self and the companies that I've created, I struggle, and I'm sure a lot of you on the listening also struggle with this question of, I really want this thing, but when push comes to shove, when one fire over here is raging and another fire is raging, I have to reprioritize. And so when I said, I really want this thing here, it's not that I'm not being accountable to myself. It's that I'm trying to figure out how to prioritize and manage all this crap that's going on around me. And I feel like that's where maybe I lose accountability. I'm sure a lot of people listening feel similarly to that. So the problem I think I have myself and or those that I've talked to is accountability a linear path? And if it is, how do I stay on that path? If accountability is not a linear path, how do I manage all the crap around me to still remain accountable to the things that I laid out for myself in the future? Because that's a struggle aspect of nothing ever is going to fall into perfect order.
Sure.
And I just don't know whether or not there is this false belief of, to be accountable, there has to be only one path that I take.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic illustration too, because it points to something that is often missed. Our logical brains, and most entrepreneurs, most executives are very, very logical, analytical, right? They're not necessarily emotional. They don't think all day about the Kardashians or things like that. And when you get logical, right, and even when I say logical, we start thinking things like math. And what is math? Math is very black and white. It's very binary. And that's the challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs and executives, right? Is that they need almost on an emotional level for things to be ultra clear, right? And you can see this in the evidence of their personal lives and their relationships, right? Is this thing did not match my model of the world. I don't understand. And they always are trying to go over and over about this understanding of like why it didn't meet this specific model. And it's like, at the end of the day, things just aren't that black and white. If you roll back and remember my bit about the fact that we are all on this very uncertain path and it's very foggy, you understand why we have a need for that. We need things to be black and white because we live in constant uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to make things black and white. And then we build expectations based on them being black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens, right? You thought at the beginning of the year that you were going to do X, Y, and Z. And then, oops, that didn't happen. Now what happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I not accountable? Is something wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
Am I not doing something right? No. Who are you comparing yourself to, number one?
Yeah.
But also, what expectation did you have that like you were some sort of fortune teller that knew ahead of time exactly how things were going to go? And then when you've restricted your model of the world to those things happening being the only version of success that you'll accept, you're destined to be unhappy. Because the moment something changes, you're outside of that model of success. And it's like, I can't be successful now because it didn't do X, Y, and Z. And I think one of the biggest events that's happened recently was the 2020, the pandemic, right? How many people went into 2019, 2020, right? Go look at your goals and see what you're planning on doing.
Yes.
And then watch how the world instantly changed that for you. Now, if I ask you to go back and look at the year 2020 and assess your results, even for most, having that big change and going through something that as a world we were experiencing for the first time in our lives that was so much bigger than us, I love when I hear people say, you know what, we got through all those challenges and we survived. And I'm like, that's a good model of success, because you're forgetting the fact that January 2020, right, that you had this model that you didn't even know might not have been possible. And had you still held on to that, right, I think most of us had just got wiped out March 15th or so,
Yeah.
right? Had you held on to that model, you would have looked at that and been like, well, I didn't press forward and triple my business that year.
Yep.
Well, you know what? That would have been a freaking miracle at the end of the day.
Right.
So we do have to give ourselves a lot of not only credit, but just grace and leeway to be like, you know what? We're not always going to be on every day. We're not always going to nail things. We're not always going to be able to push, because we have personal lives too. We have challenges in the industry that we can't see. We have staff and organization changes that we can't predict. And the very key thing that comes behind somebody starting to give themselves credit is you watch things evolve organically in a way that's like, we're going to take what's good and we're going to push that forward. What kind of mood are you in more often when you're optimistic about where you are, and when you're in a good mood, and when you are grateful for what you have and you are accepting of what you've done and where you are?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you're more likely to get better results or worse? Contrast to when we're beating ourselves up all the time. Well, We're just not there. Or I'm just not the person, or I'm just not working hard enough. It's not going to get you any closer to your results, right? You're going to hold yourself back. And I think what's powerful is all of that is inside of your control, right?
Oh, 100%.
All of that.
It's all a mental thing. It's a game that we want to play, but we don't want to play. We can play, but we should play. It's a weird environment to say there are so many things that I have in my control, and yet I think that they're out of my control. And that's why I go back to the question of like, there's no one path. And the moment that I deviate, or the moment that another fire pops up, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not staying on the right path forward. And yet in those environments, I realize that maybe maybe that's when I have to hire someone or bring someone in to offload that thing that I wanted to do or to go start that pilot program that I wanted to go do. Because if it's so important to me, I shouldn't shoulder the responsibility or the burden myself. And the reason I say that is because it took me years to get to a point where perfect and late never works, but good and on time does.
Right.
And the reality is while I may want perfect, I can accept someone's good because they're good if I train them the right way, maybe 80, 85% of what I would expect. And then once it's delivered, once it's created, I can continue after that fact, kind of massaging it and tweaking it to get it to that perfect point. But if I never do that, if I never take that initiative to hire that person, I just have this goal that's sitting out here that continues to sit out there that I keep pushing off into the future. And I'm not accountable to the myself. I'm not accountable to the goal. I'm not accountable to the people that I've promised this thing to. And it's a hard thing to wrap my mind around to say, if I truly want to be accountable, I have to realize that I can't do everything. And I have to figure out how to prioritize the things in my life that are things that I know I can do and then hire out for the rest. Good example is I have the cleaners come in twice a month. I know I can clean my house, but I value a clean house. I value my time and I value the work that these individuals do. And so if I can help them and they can help me, then we are basically creating a symbiotic relationship where both of us benefit. And yet I get to come home to a clean house twice a week. And it's an amazing feeling. And it's one thing off of my plate that I don't have to worry about versus the fire of, oh crap, the dog did this or the kid did
too
that.
much.
So, exactly correct.
Yeah, too
exactly
much.
Correct.
Too much to do.
So when we think about accountability, when we think about coaching, when we think about that big, hairy, audacious goal, I'd love to hear how some of the clients in the past that you've worked with, like what kind of problems do they normally come to you with? And what are some examples or some experiences that you've witnessed, and how have you guided them along that direction to either create clarity in their life or to help them become more accountable to the things that they've laid out for themselves?
Sure. So now, mind you, I have to be a bit ambiguous here because I have pretty strict confidentiality as deep as we're going with some of these clients. But just to take you through a bit of the process, what happens, and really, like I said, because I've narrowed in my tool set and the specific types of persons that not only I identify with, but now that I continually work with, a lot of my job is pattern recognition and pattern interruption, right? Because we all work on these loops. You have click, run script in your mind for about everything. That's how our brain becomes efficient. So a lot of clients that I work with on the individual level specifically exhibit the exact same patterns. And equal to that is they are very surprised when they find out they have the exact same problems that everybody else has. So
we're not unique?
Yeah, right. We're not. I know that you've been sold such a fantastic dream that you are significant as an individual, and you absolutely are, right? And we love everybody and their personality as a unique individual. But we are definitely built from a social fabric, and we all exhibit a lot of the exact same traits because what we consume and our life experiences are all very similar. In a very broad sense, obviously, not everybody's stories are identical. So a lot of what I initially deal with entrepreneurs, the number one challenge, and I know you and I have talked about this in the past, but for the listeners, I think they'll identify with this really well, is the word overwhelm. And there's two very, very clear distinctions I look for there. There's two words. There's overloaded and there's overwhelm. What's the difference between those two? So when I hear the word overwhelm, there's two pieces to that. You have a lot going on, and equally you're not very clear about it, right? So when you feel overwhelmed, it's because you have the weight of the world on you, but you can't see it for what it is. So you can't really break it down. You can't take it step by step. It just feels like everything's coming at me at once. I don't know what to do because I can't even bring a logical process to this because I don't even know what I'm looking at. Contrast that to people that say they're overloaded. Overloaded is very similar in that you have a lot going on, maybe more than you can get done in a reasonable time frame, but you are a bit clear about it, right? You do know what's going on. You do know what you have to do, your objectives, your KPIs, but it's just too much. And those are two very different problems.
I love that distinction.
Yeah, one is a clarity problem and one is a delegation problem.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, delegation's probably on both sides of that.
Fair enough.
The one that I hear the most is the word overwhelm. And it's good for me to hear that because it shows me where generally there's a lot of room to be had, or excuse me, a lot of progress to be made very early. Getting clarity on exactly what it is that person is challenged with, right? Even that process of like, you're overwhelmed. Let's stop and start listing off everything that you think is in your head, right? And we get through level 1. And then when we read through that, we get through level 2 and level 3 and we peel back the onion. Just that exercise for people, I think, really goes, okay, I've sat there and talked to people and looked at what was on the sheet and just looked back at them and they're like, well, you don't need to say much. And I'm like, yeah, you are trying to do all of this. And half of this has nothing to do with where you want to go. Right. And where did you pick all this up at? Oh, I want to go do X. Oh, I want to go do Y. And it's like, where are you pulling that from? Because your vision, your roadmap, where you want to go doesn't include half these things. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't it be prudent to just get rid of all that? How would you still be overwhelmed? Possibly. Generally, it moves into, well, I'm overloaded. Mm-hmm. Right. Let's talk about delegation from there on out. Right. Because at the end of the day, you can only do so much. You only have so much mental energy. You only have so much physical energy every day. But just the clarity aspect of really defining what is it that you have in your head? What is it that you have expectations set for yourself? We need to be very clear on those things. And this is also true in organizational accountability. Clarity is one of the biggest key components. If you don't, if your subordinate, if your employee isn't clear on things, how are they ever going to be successful? If you aren't clear,
how can you obviously teach them how to be clear or give them guidance and so forth?
What does success look like?
Yeah.
If they don't know, and equally, if as a leader, you're not looking internally, right? And this is where I want you to hold this person accountable comes into play. My first question to that employee that they want me to hold accountable, and I generally don't work that far down the chain myself, is, well, what was your objective? And they're like, well, I kind of don't know. And it's like, actually, this starts at the top.
Oh, wow.
Right? The leader has to be very clear in the first place. They have to show that pathway to each employee what success looks like. They don't know otherwise, right? I can know my job duties, but that doesn't mean I know what success looks like to you as my manager, right? It could be very different. I don't know what your expectations are. And that hasn't ever been communicated. Most of the time we find that leader themselves isn't very clear on those things they are assigning out or delegating and what that means to the organization. And then you start to see that everybody's just kind of flying blind, right? They're flying that 747 with a sleeping mask over their face.
Wow.
And it's like, well, no wonder we feel like things aren't getting done here, because you can't even tell me what needs to be done outside of what needs to be done today, what you asked for, and what it means to this organization and where it's going.
That just blew my mind, because as I'm literally thinking about the idea of accountability, it truly does come back to clarity. If I am laser clear on wanting to lose weight and how to lose weight, it's me just benchmarking day by day by day my performance against myself, not against anybody else. If I choose to not do something, I'm choosing not to go work out. Well, why? Did I make a choice the night before to stay out late and have a few drinks? Did I not get a good night of sleep? Like, what was the choice that I made? And in that moment, I'm making a choice to go against the goal that I've set for myself. And that choice can either be, I can either come back on path and continue to move towards my goal, or I can realize that goal that I set wasn't really a goal that I wanted to achieve. And then therefore I need to pivot and move toward a different goal. And so that lack of clarity, I think that's fascinating, because when you say you want to hit a goal, but you don't have that execution plan in place, you don't have that path forward, even though it might be 15 different paths to get to the same end goal, finding the path that works for you and is laser focused on clarity and how to get there helps create more efficiency. And if you're at the top of the organization and you don't have that clear goal, there's no way you can expect any of your employees beneath you
Absolutely.
to achieve their things, which means they're ultimately going to be bouncing around the walls of the building trying to figure out, how do I get this goal? How do I do my part in achieving this goal? And man, I just think about the things that I've done now. And
Yeah, sent you spinning here.
yeah.
I want to go back to your example real quick because I think the fitness example is one that I use often because it's very, very clear for people. So how do you lose weight? Unfortunately, let me blow up the $1 billion industry. It's very simple, and this is obviously very well known. You eat less and you move more.
Mhm.
So at a fundamental, losing weight and working out isn't the problem for people, right? Life is. Life is the challenge there,
Yeah.
because how to do it has been set out for, I don't know, ages. And in fact, our bodies are constantly trying to fix what we mess up during the day, right? When we go to sleep, our minds are dumping and cleaning, our bodies are dumping and cleaning, and then we spend all day jacking that up to let our bodies fix it overnight, right?
Love that.
So that's very simple. But one of the things you mentioned is you skipped your workout one day. This is a great example for what accountability coaching goes like. I'm not here to be like, you've failed, because does that set you up for the future? No. Success in anything is about consistency over time.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same is true for business. You know, you might not be in the best business in the world, but if you do any business long enough and you're making the right moves, you're going to have some version of success, right? Whether it meets your model and expectation is yet to be seen. That's where the deviation comes in. But at the end of the day, if you're consistently working at something, no different than if you consistently work to learn a new language, eventually you're going to learn that language. Are those things linear? Are they binary? Do you have to work out 3 days a week, every day a week for the rest of your life to be fit? No. And this is where the challenge comes in, of where people trip themselves on their way to success is, I didn't go to the gym today, or I missed this week, or, you know, maybe something big happened in life and I, you know, was off for a month. And they come to me and they're like, you know what, this is never going to work. And I'm like, I don't really care that you missed a month. It's what you do now that matters. I can't change the past. I can't go back in time and put you back in that gym, but you have a decision to make today. Is it still what you want? And if it is, get in the gym, move yourself and eat less, do that consistently over time, and you've won that game. I've worked with one of the most amazing people I've ever met, Emil Hodzovic. He's a fitness coach. He's kind of a nomad. And I remember when we met up early this year, he had the most amazing version of like how to make fitness simple. And he illustrated the story of a client that he had who was a busy entrepreneur. And the guy was just like, I don't have time to do all this. And he said, okay, I'm going to break this down for you really simple. You want to lose 10 pounds, 15 pounds, whatever it is. He's like, can you walk? And he's like, well, yeah, who couldn't walk? He's like, do you have 15 minutes a day? He's like, yeah. He's like, well, can you start with walking 15 minutes a day? Sure, I can do that, right? But that's not going to get me to my goals. He's like, so, okay, if you don't believe that, that's fine. He goes, but let's set out that you're going to walk 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week for the next 6 months. And he said, great, I'll go do that. Lo and behold, doing that consistently, and if you just sit there and continue to do that over time, you will lose that 10 pounds, right? Because you are getting that exercise. And generally what happens is, if you want to experience a shortcut and get results faster, you will elevate yourself. But the fact that you set the expectation low and you said, rather than trying to go and lift all these heavy weights all at once, I'm just going to be consistent over time, and I'm going to build on that as a habit first, right? That's my baseline, that I'm not willing to go below that. But if I want to get results faster, I'll go above that. That is absolutely amazing, because it's the same thing that happens in business. I'm not trying to make $1 million tomorrow. I'm trying to continually build and be consistent over time, because I know the more consistent I am, I'm going to learn more. I'm going to have more clients. I'm going to build my revenue. I'm going to build my organization. And that just doesn't stop. And if that's your baseline, success is almost all but guaranteed outside of industry and massive catastrophic events.
Well, this is like the issue of everybody wants the shortcut. Everybody wants the cheat code. And I think it's that instant gratification of, I want to lose 25 pounds tomorrow. I want to make $1 million. I want to win the lottery kind of mentality. And it sounds like to truly be successful and accountable, consistency is a huge component of that. Accept the failure, because you're gonna fail. To think that you're not gonna fail and that you're gonna always be perfectly on point, in and of itself is a failure, because you are not acknowledging your human side. The fact that you will wake up one day and you will just be sick. You will wake up one day and you will be sore. You will wake up one day and some emergency will happen and it will deviate. It's what you do to get back on the path. And so I'm curious, the clients that come to you, are they coming to you more for clarity, to help them better, to be less overwhelmed, and for you to help them figure out how to offload more? Are they coming to you because they need help in being consistent? Or is it a combination of those two things?
I think that, and I say I think because I've heard so many different versions. I think people in general don't really know what it is they need. So it would be fantastic to me if they came to me and knew, basically did my job before I did it. Generally, I have the CEO or the entrepreneur that comes and either is on the pathway but completely overwhelmed and feels like they're starting to fall short, maybe of their own expectations of that of their organization, or they have set out a pretty big vision and they're having trouble connecting that with what they're doing day to day, which naturally leaves them feeling like they're not accountable, that they're not productive enough, that there's something missing. And that's when they seek out, like, well, and this is what I think is fantastic, is when they see a gap, and they go, you know what, obviously I don't have the resources or know-how. Let me find somebody that does, which is why every discovery call that I do, the very first thing I say is, thank you for reaching out and recognizing that there's a challenge and that you've decided that, finding the right tool is the next move. Because for a lot of people, I think that's the hardest part, is I'm challenged by this. It must just be all on me. And it's like, you know what, if you want to get insane results in life and be a successful entrepreneur, it's not you very rarely, if ever, see it happen from a guy by himself on an island, isolated from the world.
Yeah.
There's too much uncertainty. There's too much that's an unknown. There's too many changes, to operate with that mindset in a world where, your pathway is not going to look like anybody else's, even if you're in the same industry.
Yeah. Because
it's just so different. It's like you need the entire, not the entire community, but you need outside help. You need to have somebody seeing that's had different experiences, that's seen different things in different industries or even similar industries, and really, really leverage that. We have to use leverage all the time in what we do to get these insane results.